What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel Anime Fiction. I'm back with a new episode of First Naruto was reincarnated as a hollow with a system part 5. And if you did enjoy the video, give this a like, and if you're new to my channel and like my content, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more crossover fictions. Now let's begin this new video.
Chapter 39 The Next Evolution. Well, woodlands are no longer among my favorite locations. At least this one appears to be distinct from the ordinary ones on Earth. He muses as he follows the spirit signature he has chosen. Naruto eventually stumbled upon a group of Gillian traversing the forest. He wasn't sure if it was because of the system or because he kept his consciousness during the evolution, but he was still able to employ his previous skills despite being in the Gillian form. While tracking the trio of Gillian, he concealed himself with illusory aura. Illusory aura worked perfectly. It simply seemed to have a large rise in spirit power consumption, which was most likely owing to his equally massive increase in size. Only his energy blade skill appeared to be squandered, as he lacked blades in his current form. When compared to the hollow he was used to dealing with on Earth, the three Gillians seemed weirdly tame. Perhaps the increased density of spirit particles or something else in Hueco Mundo was causing this, making them less hungry for souls, unlike the normal hollow on Earth were always hungry. As he stalked up behind the one closest to him, he closed in on the group without their noticing him. Alright, there's no time like the present. Let's get started. He tried to prepare himself for his first fight with Gillian. He used his blood artery to increase the power of his assault and unleash a crushing surprise attack on his first target. He slammed into the first one with such force that the dry ground broke. The crack drew its attention, but before it could reply, he had already taken a large bite out of its mask, removing it from the battle and devouring it one massive mouthful at a time while the other two were still too astonished to react. Fortunately, these Gillian were still too foolish to notice that they were being attacked by an invisible foe. They may even be a little slower than typical hollow in this regard, owing to hundreds of hollow souls contending for authority rather than one soul in command. He should keep in mind that Gillian's masks may be different, indicating that there is a single soul in control. Plus 40,500 XP, 53,230 spirit power plus 1012. Spirit ability. 237,478 to 238490, mission. Gillian 1 20th Devour 20. The other two began charging a Sero while tearing into the Gillian. He jumped back, evading a Sero that landed where he had been consuming the first Gillian. However, the other managed to rip a chunk out of his side. Fortunately, it was only a flesh wound. He started moving through the trees just to make sure they couldn't see him. Hollow roars of frustration erupted from them. They appeared to be intelligent enough to recognize that something had assaulted them and that they had failed to recognize it. It had kicked in with his new and improved super speed regeneration, and for only a little spirit force had already recovered the wound a handful of seconds later. Despite his accomplishment, he missed his arm blades and the skills he could utilize with them. If he still possessed them and used them in conjunction with Energy Blade, he could definitely steamroll these three without even thinking twice. He could use Sero, but they were probably already drawing enough attention without his needing to add more. He circled the two that were looking for him before leaping in again, approaching the one that had attacked him from behind, seizing its mask and firmly ripping it off to swallow. It didn't even get a chance to morph into a pseudo-Arankar before Naruto devoured his mask and what was remained of him. The last Gillian's limited brain capacity seemed to realize that whatever was assaulting it was significantly stronger, and it attempted to flee. Plus 43,800 XP, 78,080 raise your level. One free status point added, XP, 18,950 79,250 spirit power plus 1095. Spirit ability. 238,490 to 239585, mission. Gillian 2 20ths Devour 20. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for the second Gillian to be devoured and run after the last. Though he didn't gain dexterity when transforming into a Gillian, he presumed the other Gillian didn't either because he was still a bit faster than them. He effectively focused blood artery on his arm and hand, transforming it into a lethal spike. He leapt onto the sprinting Gillian and pierced its head from behind, devouring the final one. plus 47,200 XP, XP, 66,150 79,250ths, Spirit Power plus 1180. Spirit Power. 240,765 to 239,585, Mission. Gillian 3/20ths Devour 20. Okay. They don't go down as readily as ordinary hollow. They have a strong resistance and a massive damage output. That Sero barely grazed me, yet it sailed right through my defenses, which may be a little dumber than typical hollow. At least until one of their consciousnesses seizes possession of their body. I've seen far smarter creatures than these three. He discusses the struggle and the implications he can derive from it. They do, however, provide a crazy amount of XP and spirit power. I'm sure I'll hit a plateau again someday, but for the time being, this should give me at least a few more levels in days rather than months, he thinks with a predatory smile. System, put the free point into dexterity, he instructs. Answer. The dexterity of the affirmative host has been increased by 1 to 61. Alright, it's time to grind some Gillian before Eisen returns. If I can manage groups like this on a regular basis, I should be able to achieve 20 by then, and if Ijuka's is as great of a leap as Gillian was, I'll be incomparable to where I was as a basic hollow by then. I already appear to outperform the Gillian I've discovered thus far. Even if I didn't use my illusory aura, and their lack of intelligence to fool them, I could definitely take these three on head-on, but who would be so stupid? He muses. The lack of a day and night cycle in the forest of Manos, combined with his lack of sleep and non-stop hunting and battling, made it difficult to keep track of time. Naruto had been going back and forth between tracking fresh prey and consuming them or fleeing if there were too many. He could ascend to the surface to get an estimate based on how much the moon phase has changed, but in his current form without wings, climbing up and out of here would be a huge hassle and time better spent hunting. He'd just swallowed a pair of Gillian and knew he was coming close to finishing the mission. System. How long have I been in Hueco Mundo? He inquired. Response. 12 days, 6 hours, 23 minutes, and 54 seconds. Never change the system. He says cynically, never change. When he was completely cut off from social connection, he wished he had one of those systems with a real personality to interact with. But beggars cannot be choosers. Affirmative response. With a wry smile, he shakes his head. Okay. Well, could you show me my status panel? He inquires. 720,000 XP bonus from Hollow, plus 18,000 Hollow Spirit Power. Plus 52 Spirit Power gained through passive absorption. Plus 6 levels. 6 stat points added. Equals status board equals. Naruto Uzumaki's name, spiritual age, 58, ethnicity, Hollow. Gillian is ranked first. Level, 118 to 124, XP, 59,230 86,550ths. Equals stats. Equals, fortune, 84, deficiency, 61 to 67, section 40 of the Constitution. Intelligence level. 30, 240,765 to 258,817 spirit power. Stat points available. 0, equals passive ability, equals, absorption of spiritual energy. Extremely fast regeneration, acidic note, equals active abilities equals. Separation of soul and body, spirit power hiding. Aura of illusion, Blut, energy sword, transcribe. Sagai Hashiji. Sero. Kumon. Negation. How am I doing on the mission? He inquires. Mission. Devour 2020 Gillian. Okay, I still have roughly a week before Eisen is supposed to leave Soul Society. System. Is it possible to maintain stacking experience and stats instead of giving me the evolution as a prize right away? He asks, seeking to maximize his returns because he has some time to spare. Calculating. Answer. It is possible. Rewards are made utilizing energy sucked from the eaten spirit power of the host. Unlike previous awards, the present reward was simply made by avoiding the siphoning of spirit force, which accelerated the evolution rate. The mechanism can invert this, boosting the drained spirit power and using it to provide an actual reward while slowing evolution. Is the host willing to make this change? Wouldn't this slow down my leveling speed, rendering the whole thing pointless? He wonders. Answer. Incorrect. The increases in spirit power from soul conversion would be reduced. However, experience is not based on eaten souls. Then yeah, it would be even better if I could obtain a prize and grind for a few more days before developing. I'll leave the changes to you, he replied. Affirmative response. Mission aborted. New mission, Ijuka's evolution. Reward. Silencioso passive skill. While talking with the system, he observes a few stronger signals approaching from afar. It's more powerful than he is right now. He dashed several hundred feet in the opposite way. Although he is used to illusory aura, taking care of everything, he wants a little extra insurance, so he immediately performs Hashiji Sagai on his immediate surroundings, creating a second layer of concealment that makes him even less likely to be noticed due to the very space he is in being concealed and making others not want to pay attention to it. A couple of hollow appear a few minutes later. Ijukas, because they don't resemble Gillian and are far too powerful to be simple hollow. One resembles a gray snake, another a brown and golden lion, and a unicorn. They begin to look into what's left. Even though all of the Gillian have been devoured, there are still remains of the conflict. They are entirely ignoring Naruto's space because Hashiji Sagai draws their attention away from him. Can you tell me where it is? We've been tracking for days and yet don't seem to be getting any closer, the unicorn grumbles. Relax your hooves. They may not be present, but the tunes are newer, the snake answers with arrogance. I can smell it, but the trail stops here, the lion adds. Naruto is both nervous and relieved that he didn't hesitate to deploy the barrier because his illusion doesn't disguise his scent, even if it is less distinct as a hollow because certain hollow have improved senses that can still pick it up on it. Meanwhile, the barrier affects all senses, giving the impression that the things inside do not exist. C. We're still running around, says the unicorn. Shut up. Your impatience isn't helping us investigate this any faster, the snake grumbles to the unicorn. Whatever. It says and begins to ignore her in favor of glancing around. The snake simply shakes its head and begins to ignore the unicorn in favor of looking at the lion. Alright. We were directed to look into the recent surge in disappearances of Gillian. It's obviously not a coincidence, as we've found a few sites of combat like this before, so it's not a one-off. Have you had any luck tracking it down from your end? She inquires. No, I can vaguely smell it here around the marks, but then it just vanishes into thin air, she adds, her head downcast. We'll work it out. After all, we're getting closer and closer, the snake replies, slightly raising the lion's spirits. Obviously, based on the power and destruction used, it has to be at least a Gillian in strength, but they're generally too stupid for this. So it's definitely a new Ijukas or a desperate Ijukas looking for some quick dinners, she rationalizes. The lion agrees, but the unicorn appears to be roaming around. It was a stretch to say she was investigating. Finally, they went, leaving Naruto relieved in his barrier, waiting for them to exit the range of his spiritual senses. In the meantime, back on Earth, Masaki was worried and a little afraid as she approached her family's home, which she hadn't seen in years. Would they forgive me? She speculated. She sighed, then rang the doorbell. Yuzu opens the door but does not immediately respond. Her and Karen were only 5 years old when their mother died, so she is perplexed that she recognizes her. But she can't quite place her right away. Masaki collapses to her knees and tears as she hugs her daughter, who is absolutely surprised. Yuzu. She manages to say between sobs. Seeing her had triggered all of her emotions at once. Yuzu awoke from her trance and inquired, Mom? Why yes. I've returned. She responds, and Yuzu begins sobbing and fiercely hugs her back. Yuzu. What's the hold up? They hear Karen approaching to look for Yuzu, who has gone to answer the door. But it didn't take her long to comprehend what was going on and to rush up to join them in their heartfelt hugs. Ishin arrived not long after Karen to see what was going on, but he just fell to his knees sobbing, unable to believe what his eyes were witnessing as he watched his daughters and the wife he thought was deceased. Impossible. He mumbled. He was perplexed because everything pointed to her death, even the fact that his powers had gradually returned over the 4 years since the events of Masaki and Ichigo. The only tiny difference was the lack of a body, but with the violent rains causing the river to swell wildly, this wasn't surprising even if she hadn't been swallowed by a hollow. They had looked for a long time, but as it became clear that his powers were returning, Kazuki informed him that this was most likely due to her dying away, releasing the seal on his powers, and then returning to him. Masaki watched him standing up hand in hand with her girls and going up to Ishin, the three of them hugging him after a short while of them hugging and Ishin just being absolutely astonished and in tears. "Hello. Honey," she whispers timidly. He's still a little surprised and feels her cheeks to make sure she's really there before he hugs her back fiercely, scared to let go. Where is Ichigo?" she ultimately asks. Ishin pauses, unsure what to say to their two girls. He's on vacation with some friends. We should discuss it later." He ultimately chose to dodge the subject in front of the two young and innocent girls. The family spent time catching up, while Masaki kept most of what happened and where she had been from her girls because she didn't want to expose anything supernatural to them just yet. When it came time for the females to retire to bed, Ishin summoned Urahara Kazuki to discuss. He did, however, appear not long after. "Oh hey. Hello, and welcome back. What have you been up to?" Kazuki questioned, jokingly, when he first saw Masaki. Ishin shook his head, but he was also curious about a more detailed explanation now that their girls were in bed. "How are you doing?" Kazuki inquires. "It's quite a long story." With a sigh, she said. Ishin placed his palm lightly on her back, nodding encouragingly at her. "So Ichigo and I were attacked that night. I attempted to protect him, but instead was attacked. However, as he fled, it was discovered that he did not kill me and instead spit me out," she stated. Kazuki's eyebrow lifted in inquiry, but he maintained his light-hearted tone. Ishin remained apprehensive. "Remember that boy who died 20 years ago when we fought the Hollow?" she inquired. Ishin gives a nod. Kazuki merely stared at them, perplexed. After all, he wasn't there, only hearing about the events later and dealing with Masaki's troubles as a result. "Unlike the others, the Hollow who took me was sentient and told me he was that boy. He had changed into a Hollow but was caught for experimentation by Captain SSK Aizen," she explained. She now had Kazuki's entire attention because he was curious about what Aizen had been up to during his banishment. Ishin appeared to be depressed as he reflected about that night. Too many things had gone wrong. "So, what exactly happened?" Kazuki inquired, his enthusiasm palpable. "Well, he was able to escape thanks to an illusion skill he possessed that they were unaware of. Despite the fact that it took 10 years. He had overheard parts of their intentions, including the attack and interference with me. He couldn't risk them knowing the attack had failed, which is why I couldn't return until now," she explained. "Now? How come now?" Kazuki inquired, perplexed. "Well, Aizen's plans have begun. He should have faked his death and be preparing to betray Soul Society forever as soon as he gets his hands on the H-Goku," she continued. "How did you find out about the H-Goku?" Kazuki inquired, surprised. "During the experiments, he overheard it. Aizen appears to be working alongside a few others in Soul Society. Kanami-sen and Ichimaru Jin. He is already practically the monarch of Hueco Mundo, and he intends to use the H-Goku to finish his experiments on fusing Shinigami and hollow power to produce hybrids and raise an army," she continues. Kazuki slaps his fist on his palm and says, "That explains a lot with the strange things that have been happening lately." "Strange things?" Masaki inquires. "Yeah, like Ichigo becoming a Shinigami substitute, his friends gaining powers, and his little friend who had my H-Goku being taken to Soul Society," he adds quietly. "What? Shinigami? Where is he now?" she insists. Ishin was perspiring profusely. Ishin gazed at Kazuki, attempting to think of an explanation. Kazuki pretended to be unconcerned about his stares. "Well, the girls were attacked by a hollow. Ichigo heard a Shinigami while attempting to save them, and she granted him her abilities to save them." He began to describe what had led to the current scenario. Masaki appeared worried since, unlike everyone else, she had yet to see Ichigo. Then two Shinigami came to take the female Shinigami away and attacked Ichigo and his friend while destroying the source of Ichigo's Shinigami powers. He continued before returning his gaze to Kazuki. Then Kazuki assisted him in regaining his powers and created a portal for Ichigo, his friends, and Yoruichi to travel to Soul Society in order to save and return her, he concluded. "Are you two crazy?" she inquired. Well, I hid the H-Goku in the Gigai that Shinigami Kuchiki Rukia used, and I fused it with her soul. Kazuki elaborated. So that's how Aizen's trying to get his hands on it? She inquires. Well, Yoruichi is there to help them, he justifies. Masaki locked her gaze on her husband. And how is she just supposed to keep them safe? She wonders. They're stronger than you think, and I needed to be here to care for our daughters, and he had no idea about our history. He spoke uncomfortably. There's nothing I can do right now, but if they don't return safely, so help me, she adds, threatening Ishin most of all. Ishin tries to apologize and appears as pitiful as possible, unable to come up with any good justifications to appease his wife, who is ready to rip off his head and, given the spiritual pressure she is exerting, she may be able to do so. In the meantime, you're sleeping on the couch until they return, she finished his sentence. Kazuki furrowed his brows as he became aware of Masaki's spiritual push. Didn't you lose your powers? He inquired, seeking to divert the subject. I did lose them, but they reawakened over the years I spent near that hollow. But that's not all. Can you put up a barrier to keep this room from being seen from outside? She asks Kazuki. Kazuki nods and creates a barrier around the chamber, separating it from the outer world through all senses. All right, we're clear, he says. She nods and begins to transform into her Nyctig form, causing the hollowified armor to cover her and her eyes to turn black with an orange iris and her incisors to extend. Finally, she displays her Unheilish Bogen, which transforms into her Heilig Bogen throughout the metamorphosis. Kazuki approaches her, scrutinizing her eyes and caressing the armor with curiosity. How intriguing. The armor is similar to the material of the hollow mask, and the transformation is similar to the visored, but there is no Shinigami power involved, he muses. This also explains why your powers returned, he says to Ishin, who is trying hard not to be recognized right now. Eh? He exclaims. It appears that the hollow part of her power gradually displaced the Shinigami part of your power that had been sealed inside her over the years, driving it out and returning it to you. Also, somehow, during this procedure, it managed to maintain equilibrium with her Quincy powers, which had gone dormant, he speculated. It wasn't quite balanced right away. I almost died when the hollow side burst out and would have gone on a rampage if I hadn't been stopped, she explained. Although it looks similar to the visored, this shouldn't be possible because, unlike Shinigami, where it is difficult but possible, her Quincy spirit power should clash with the hollow part until she died. However, having restrained it with your Shinigami power and gently allowed it to integrate over time rather than all at once, it succeeded. She is probably the first and probably the last person to succeed rather than die, he says. Masaki and Ishin don't seem to be paying attention and just nod along with what he's saying as he speaks his opinion more for his own advantage. Meanwhile, Masaki deactivates the metamorphosis, returning her to normal. I'd love to get some measurements to see how the two blend while you keep your transformed state, Kazuki explains. Masaki frowns, as it is about the last thing on her mind right now. Perhaps we can do that another time. She said it grudgingly, more worried with her son than appeasing Kazuki's curiosity for the time being. Although she would eventually like to know more about who she had become, she couldn't focus on that just now. Kazuki eventually left, leaving Masaki and Ishin alone, and he felt he didn't have much an option but to try to persuade her over the next several days and perhaps make some headway in calming her down. Return to Hueco Mundo. Naruto had just defeated another small gang of Gillian. He continued to avoid large groups. Because even though he was significantly more powerful than a typical Gillian and could easily fool most of them, if he was surrounded by dozens of them all shooting their Sero at him at the same time, he was still extremely likely to die. Also, with those 3 Ijukas pursuing him down, even if he doesn't die, he could be hurt and recovering while they find him. Instead, he looked for small groups of stragglers who were on their own that he could pick off. Although this was much slower, it was far safer, and while he was in a hurry, he wasn't in a hurry to die. The prerequisites for evolution have been met. Evolution begins. Oh my god. Naruto reflected as he received the warning at the last moment. Prognostat, to be honest, this one was difficult. It's difficult to justify sending Ichigo and his gang into Soul Society knowing that Ishin was a Shinigami all along and had been friends, acquainted with Kazuki before Ichigo was even born, and knowing how powerful both are. but they send a bunch of kids to try to retrieve Rukia or, more importantly, the H-Goku. It has to happen for the plot to work, but looking back, the only way I can understand it is that Ishin, after losing his wife, is just a bad parent who puts his son in a life-threatening scenario that he himself would be far more prepared for. Perhaps he subconsciously blames Ichigo for his wife's death as well, and hence would rather stay home and protect his children from little hazards than risk his own safety for his son. He hadn't even had time to use Hashiji Sagai to conceal himself when his spirit power began coursing through every part of his body, facilitating his transition to a Jukas. Naruto felt his shape compressing and refining. Thankfully, this wasn't as painful as it had been previously, letting him to retain some of his consciousness rather than entirely blacking out, allowing him to observe his line of sight narrowing dramatically. Evolution has ended. Rank: Jukas to Gillian. Power: 84 to 126, IQ: 71 to 213, Formation: 40 to 60. Intelligence level: 30 to 60, Spirit power: 268.441 to 537.682. Mission finished. Acquired passive skill, Silencioso. Silencioso. A passive ability that dampens 95% of all non-vocal noises produced by the user at all times. Phew. At least I don't appear to be excessively large, he reflected cheerfully. He will always appreciate every progress toward a more human-like form, no matter how tiny. He wasn't sure how tall he was in comparison to his base hollow form because he hadn't been in that form in the Forest of Manos, thus he couldn't compare his current self to the current reference points. He guessed he was around the same size, perhaps a bit shorter than he was in his base hollow form, which stood around 10 feet tall. When he lifted his arms, he noticed that they had transformed back into human-like arms, with shimmering blades at the forearm. He had missed them when fighting as a Gillian because, while he didn't like having hands outside of combat, combat had been all he had done since his transformation to Gillian, and swords were what he was most comfortable with. Despite the fact that tearing Gillian apart with his hands had been new to him, he was looking forward to honing his swordsmanship. He looked down at his feet to notice that he still only had 2 legs, unlike before he converted into a Gillian, therefore he remained bipedal, which was another more human-like trait he appreciated. This also meant that he could finally put some of the footwork expertise he had gathered from spying on Byakuya, which was impossible when he was 4-legged or a giant without a sword, to use by combining it with his footwork knowledge from when he was still human. Finally, something weird caught his attention from the corners of his eyes. Wait. What the fuck? Do I have 2 more arms? He wondered as he turned his head to see a second pair of arms emerging from around his shoulders, identical to the first. It took him some time to get used to them because he had never had 4 arms before, and even though he had some innate knowledge of how to move them, it was still a completely new experience for him. Well, 4 blade arms means being able to deliver even more slashes from more directions at the same time to confuse and injure opponents. So, while not quite human-like, it'll be useful for as long as I'm in Hueco Mundo, so I'll take what I can get, he thought as he slashed with his new arms. He couldn't even hear the sound of them cutting through the air, not knowing whether to thank his new passive skill, Silencioso, for this. He also felt as light as a feather in comparison to earlier. Being a Gillian reminded him of how he imagined managing a mecha would feel, which he didn't like. He'd reapplied part of his iridescent carapace to his shoulder, shins, and back, where he'd finally regained his wings. The color remained the same, but the form was more thinner and form-fitting. Except for his 4 arms and wings, he was largely humanoid now. The carapace could be excused as seeming like armor, even if it was truly a part of his body. The carapace covering his wings changed, allowing his wings to flutter for a brief moment. This, along with the arm blades, was probably the thing that made him the happiest. Though it was conceivable to stand in the sky and fly, it just wasn't the same. Flying with wings cost him stamina rather than spirit force, which was far less damaging to him. It was also quicker, more regulated, and gave him a sense of freedom that nothing else could. Swimming was the closest thing, but it didn't provide the resistance that water did. Please show me my status panel, system. He told the system he was already pleased with the path his form had taken during evolution. Unlike before, he no longer had to contend with a big abdomen and an extra set of legs, significantly lowering the amount of room he occupied. Status board equals Naruto Uzumaki's name, spiritual age, 58. Ethnicity. Hollow, status, Ejukas, level, 128. XP. 13,810 91,710, equals stats, equals, fortune, 126, 213 dexterity. Section 60 of the Constitution, intelligence level, 60. 537,682 spirit power, stat points available, 0. Equals passive ability. Equals, absorption of spiritual energy. Extremely fast regeneration, acidic note, silencioso. Equals active abilities equals, separation of soul and body. Spirit power hiding. Aura of illusion, blut. Energy sword. Transcribe, Sagai Hashaji, Sero. Kumon. Negation. I'll have to put my new dexterity to the test. It might take some getting used to such a significant jump all at once, he reasoned. He was relieved to be back to his dexterity-focused build, as that was what he had been aiming for all along and which the Gillian form had taken away from him. However, it was a necessary evil for the sake of development. He had been surrounded without even realizing it, between relinquishing control and focusing on the evolution and its outcomes. 3 individuals emerged from behind trees in 3 separate directions, denying him the option of fleeing. Because of his loss of control throughout the evolution process, not only was his spirit power camouflage unable to cover the pressure he was emitting during the change, but he had also lost the visual camouflage given by illusory aura. The 3 that surrounding him appeared to be tracking him and had almost captured him a week before. He could probably get away using his new and improved speed and stealth skills, but he couldn't remember what their powers were while they were still Ejukas, and they, along with the Neliel trio Nel Don Pei, are the least aggressive hollows around, so he wasn't going to risk straining the relationship unless absolutely necessary. Also, pissing off one of Hueco Mundo's few Vasto Lord-rated hollows sounds like a poor idea shortly after becoming an Ejukas himself. Even more so, one that, owing to Aizen, will almost certainly be transformed into an Irankar, becoming one of the most powerful espadas very soon. While he was weighing his choices, the 3 of them moved in on him. Well. Hello there. The Ejukas, who looked like a snake, stated arrogantly, but upon closer inspection, he discovered they were all rather nervous, and the one speaking seemed ready to attack at any moment. They had witnessed the remnants of his past battles and were convinced it was an Ejukas based on the damage done in the engagements and the amount of Gillian he was taking out, only to discover him when he was maturing into an Ejukas. This meant he was already at a level where he could threaten them before he evolved, which made them very afraid for their safety now that he had become an Ejukas. They were convinced that the 3 of them could take him down, but would they all survive if they tried? They weren't so convinced about it. Should I raise my hands? No, not with blades for arms that appear like you're about to attack. Lowering them would really be less threatening. He sighed, making sure not to lift his arms to indicate he isn't a threat and keeping an eye on all 3 with both his eyes and spiritual senses at all times. Hey! Answer us. The unicorn dear one said, interrupting his thoughts. The lioness stayed silent the entire time, her gaze fixed on him. Hi? He replied, uncertain. The dry response seemed to perplex all 3 of them. Although Ejukas began to achieve sentience, they remained extremely aggressive in general, especially for newly evolved ones who had not yet adjusted to their newly found sentience. Receiving an attack was as likely as receiving a counterattack. Cat got your tongues. He smirked to the lion. The unicorn deer became irritated, frowning intensely and appearing ready to pounce on him. The lion simply growled, but she kept her calm for the most part. You. Exclaimed the unicorn deer, grumbling angrily. Foo. He seems to know how to talk. We have a few questions for you. The snake laughed arrogantly. He made it a point to act as if he knew nothing about them and had never seen them before, because as far as they knew, they had never seen or met before, and even if he had, he shouldn't have been sentient at the time. Excusing an Ejukas for superior sensibility and tranquility is one thing. A Gillian is a different story, and while it doesn't matter much right now, if Tear Harribel finds out, and he finds out once she joins Aizen, it will put a spotlight on him that he doesn't want. Are we going to stay here and wait for others to arrive? He asked them, though he wasn't too concerned given his ability to employ chaos to simply vanish. The less people who knew about all of his powers, the better. With his flippant reply, you could almost see the tick mark on the unicorn deer's head, indicating he wasn't intimidated by them or, more crucially, by her. You should know your place. We're Harribel Samas, and disrespecting us is disrespecting her, she rages. He may have been trying to keep a low profile, but now that he was in Ejukas and was interacting with sentient hollow, and would be doing so more frequently in the future, he needed to adjust his tactics from how he had been acting. In Hueco Mundo, there is only one true rule. The strong make the rules and are respected. Now that he had some kind of control, suppressing everything would do him more harm than good. The same might be said about appearing absolutely harmless. He stopped concealing his spirit pressure with spirit power concealment, and fully released it, revealing his beyond Ejuka's rank spirit pressure laced with vicious killing intent as he turns to look at the snake, who had been the most reasonable of the three, and looked at her unamused. Does she speak for the three of you? He questioned, his voice unnervingly calm despite his murderous aim. The three of them could feel the pressure on them almost driving them to buckle their knees, and the closest they had gotten to this feeling was when confronted by Barragan Louisenbarn, the uncrowned monarch of Hueco Mundo, together with Tyr Harribel. It wasn't quite that bad, but it was nothing compared to what they had to deal with when fighting other Ejukas. Their backs would have been wet if they could sweat. No. No, don't listen to her. She just likes to joke. The stupid horse. Just ignore her. The snake tried to calm things down as she was losing faith in knocking him down with some sacrifices if the three of them fought him. You could never tell for sure based on the spirit pressure alone, but there was enough for her to be concerned. The lion was hunkered and ready to pounce on him the moment things went wrong, but her pride had taken a noticeable hit, as she appeared much more hesitant now than before. How about we go to our place and just have a calm talk about it? We're all equals after all, and our leader would be happy to meet another sensible hollow. No need to do anything anyone would regret. The snake began babbling a bit nervously, but gradually calming as she continued to speak and noticed he hadn't actually attacked them yet. This type of behavior was rather frequent among the top of Hueco Mundo, and placing pressure on them could almost be considered kind in comparison to most. They led him out of the forest of Manos and into a cave on the surface. He was led down a stairwell into a chamber with a large stone table in the center. It was minimalistic and minimalist, but what did you expect from Hollow? Even the Ejukas and Vasto Lord are barely above sentient creatures before they are converted into Arankar. They are not intended for interior decoration. It appears that neither is comfort, owing to the lack of something to sit or sleep on. Tyr Harribel was nowhere to be found, and the other three were still too frightened to resume the talk after it had broken down in the forest. Naruto decided to try breaking the tense atmosphere after a long awkward pause. So, I don't think you ladies ever introduced yourselves, he said. They exchanged glances. While he had made them uneasy in the forest, the trek back without unleashing his spirit pressure and deadly purpose had helped to calm them down considerably. My name is Cyan Sung Sun, the snake hollow finally said first of the three. Emilo Apache, exclaimed the unicorn deer hollow when Sung Sun shattered the ice. And my name is Francesca Mila Rose, the lion hollow said last. And we're the Trace Bestias, *jazz hands *jkjk. Ah. Nice names, he replies, unsure how to continue the conversation. Of course. Have you taken a name yet? Sung Sun eventually asks, trying to obtain some information before Tyr Harribel arrives. That way, she can give the impression that she isn't wholly useless as a subordinate. Should I give them my real name? It's not as though it matters to any Hollow or even Soul Society. Only 2 persons know my name at this moment. Although I can't be fully honest about my origins or skills, a little bit would be nice to get off on the right foot with them. Naruto mulls. Naruto Uzumaki, you can just call me Naruto, he finally said, trying to lighten the situation even further. Oh, and it's nice to meet you three, he said. The three of them exchanged uneasy glances. Yes, nice to meet you as well, Sung Sun replied, while the other 2 cautiously nodded in agreement. A tan green-eyed beauty with wild blonde hair and skin-tight bone armor and what appeared to be a shark-tooth-styled sword for a right arm came coming down the stairs with her long bone white shark tail swinging behind her not long after. Except for the space around her smoldering eyes, her hollow mask covered the majority of her face. Did she arrive up late and make me wait on purpose to apply pressure as the superior in this relationship from the start, or was this just a coincidence? He was perplexed. As she enters the chamber, the trio all bend their heads in respect. Hollow's display of respect in this manner seemed a touch odd. Though Hollow would normally respect and heed to people more powerful than them, if for no other reason than self-preservation. Even to people who were stronger than them, they rarely bowed down. "Welcome back, Harribel-sama," they almost all exclaim at the same time. "Thank you," she said before turning to face the stranger in their cave. "Ah. This is the one we were looking for. We found him in the forest of Manos during his evolution to Ajukas," Sung's son clarifies. "Naruto Uzumaki, it's a pleasure to meet you," he adds frivolously. Harribel raises an eyebrow because it was odd for a brand new Ajukas to be so well spoken, and not only that, but she couldn't detect any murderous intent, which was nearly universal with all Hollow. "You're a strange Hollow," Harribel admitted bluntly. "Ha. I get it a lot, just ask Miss Curvy over there," Naruto laughed, nodding to Sung's son. She was just about the calmest Hollow she knew, but calm wasn't the right word. Casual was more accurate. Something that was even less common among the Hollow as they were still heavily influenced by their most base desires and used to dealing with other Hollow, most of whom wanted to eat them. "How very human," she observed. Naruto shrugged casually. "To get back on track," he stated, "so the three of them told me they wanted to talk." Harribel stared at him with interest. "No, I believe I have my answers already. We assumed there was an Ajukas rampaging through the forest of Manos, but you weren't an Ajukas and didn't appear to be rampaging. At least not if you were before," she declares, having made up her mind. "No problem. Who wouldn't want to spend time with some lovely ladies?" he says, smiling. They're all confused, especially the trio. The two muscleheads had no idea how to be a part of this kind of conversation, while Sung's son seemed surprisingly embarrassed despite her usual haughty act. Harribel was slightly more comfortable with it as Vasto Lord began to exhibit a more human-like emotional spectrum than Ajukas, but even she is thrown off by the casual banter that they haven't really run into when dealing with other people. "Oh, and I saw a big hammerhead shark-looking guy looking for you. He appeared to be out for blood, and he appeared to be more strong than you. I'd prepare for the worst, maybe even relocate if someone had tipped him off to your hideout," he cautions them. She was cautious, but largely skeptical when he described how much stronger they were, as she was only familiar with one Hollow on her level. Cheel looked up, trying to remember what it reminded her of as she looked around at the other three. "Didn't I once cut a shark like Ajukas when we confronted Berrigan?" she inquired. Apache cocked her head in contemplation, but Sung's son nodded immediately. "You did, Harribel-sama," she said firmly. "He was weak, though," she answered confidently. "I'm just giving you a heads up. I don't believe you can beat him as you are right now. Maybe if you work together flawlessly, but even then, I doubt it. He had an odd appearance. If it meant anything, he was missing his disguise. He tried dropping some information for their advantage and to instill trust in himself for future dealings with them. I believe we learned what we needed to learn. You appear to be in command of yourself. Why don't you join our group? We can help keep each other safe, increasing your chances of survival, and we have hundreds of years of experience to share," Harribel said, explaining that she had formed the group for female Hollow to protect themselves from male Hollow, but he seemed quite unusual, and she was curious to learn more. "As much as I'd like to spend more time with you four and hope to do so in the future, I have my own goals to pursue, so I must decline," he replies, slightly disappointed. As great as protection is, they're practically pacifist in that they don't devour Hollow to grow their strength, which is completely opposite to my path to power, which I just can't afford. Not to mention that Aizen could show up to recruit them at any time now, and I don't want to meet him yet. He sighed inwardly. He would need to continue devouring Hollow to maintain his insane growth speed, or he would simply slow down in growth to at or even below regular Hollow, which might be acceptable to Ajukas or Vasto Lord, who felt they had reached their limits after centuries of growth and were eventually forced to go along with Aizen due to him and the H-Goku being their only possibility for further growth, but he wasn't even close. His power was still increasing at an insane rate, going from a basic Hollow to Ajukas in 10 years, and due to the system, this growth without barriers should continue for the foreseeable future. He might have to think about future progress by the time he became an Irankar because he had no idea what came after, if anything, because it wasn't in canon, but that was still 2 whole evolutions away. This doesn't mean I wouldn't be open to meeting and working together in the future if our goals align, he remarked carefully. Harribel nodded and seemed glad or at least satisfied with this for the most part, though it was difficult to tell when all you could see was the person's eyes, and they are a rather cold and unemotional person to begin with. Alternatively, I could come over for tea and gossip. Though you should really work on your interior design first, he joked, looking around the bare chamber for additional emphasis. Even the 2 hot heads seemed to be growing numb to his off-kilter conversation style, probably assuming this was just some weird quirk in this hollow's personality. It wouldn't be the first time this happened, as Harribel herself and her 3 subordinates to a lesser extent had a very unhollow-like personality. Well, ladies, I'll see you later. Oh, and one last piece of advice from Harribel. Don't put your trust or reliance in anyone other than these 3, even if they appear to be granting your wishes. Not even me, he begins solemnly, but ends up mocking with a wink as he exits the basement cavern and returns his gaze to her. He would give her a direct warning of Eisen if he could, but they didn't know each other well enough for her to just take his word for it, so a vague warning was the best he could do for now. He could see about getting closer after she became an espada and opened her eyes after she opened her heart to him like she had the other 3 of her future fracciones. He vanished along with all evidence of his spirit power just as he was ready to exit the stairwell, as if he had never been there in the first place, and his steps are no longer audible. On his trip back to the Forest of Manos, he finally got a chance to test out his new and increased dexterity with no one looking. No one could see or hear him, and he was traveling at what he believed were shunpo, sonito-like speeds even without the talents. He wasn't sure how fast people used those skills. It seemed to vary from person to person, so he probably relied on how skilled they were at executing the specific movement skill. However, he felt like he was flying on the ground with his current speed. At least he knew he was easily breaking the sound barrier, which was exhilarating. He returned to the Forest of Manos in a fraction of the time it had taken the 4 of them to travel to the cave before, and he was confident that even if a hollow could sense through his camouflage, anything below a Vasto Lord would struggle to keep up with him speed-wise. System, please tell me how long it's been since I've been in Hueco Mundo, he inquired. Response. 17 days, 17 hours, 42 minutes, and 35 seconds. Okay. Based on what I remember, Eisen should either betray Soul Society right now or be about to do so. Then there's about a month where he's building his strength and experimenting with creating the Irankar before they attack Karakura town, and about 3 months before Orihime is kidnapped and the rest of Ichigo's gang goes after her. He went over the timeline as far as he remembered. It was probably going to become less accurate now that Masaki should have met up with her family and he had interacted with Harribel and her future Fracione, but it was better than nothing and the larger differences had only recently occurred, so the ripples shouldn't have spread too far just yet. I got from Gillian to Ijuka's in less than 3 weeks and could have done it in less than 2 if I hadn't delayed it to level some more and max the stat multiplication of evolving, he reflected. Hopefully, I can manage a similar feat in transforming to a Vasto Lord before shit starts to go down. It would be even better if I could form some alliances at that period, but the only ones I can think of are the Harribel's group, the Neliel group, and possibly Coyote Stark. The last possibility is that he is relatively laid back for a hollow. Despite his loneliness, he appears to be a difficult guy to form a relationship with if he is as shown. I should try to maintain relations with Harribel's group and see if I can meet Neliel's group, though I'm not sure where or when I should meet her, at least before she meets Ichigo. He weighed his possibilities. To be continued.
That's it for this video. Thanks for listening to this video. I hope you did enjoy the story, and if you did, like, share, and subscribe for more. And thank you all for helping support, and have a great day.